think spirituality is a very personal thing,
Hmm.
and you can't always arrive there from just reading books. You have to really experience it.
We all start at the same point and we all end at the same point. But the way
Hmm.
we get to that end point is very different because of our perspectives, our
Hmm.
experiences, and all of that.
When it comes to a matter as touchy as God,
Right.
like if you're saying we're arguing about the reality of the universe, about
Sure.
existence. This is a very heavy thing. And when you tell somebody that they're wrong about that, it can be taken very negatively.
Right.
God created humans. God did not create religion. Humans created religion.
Hey Mohini, how are you today?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
Good. Before we get started, I should say, let the people know who you are, what you do, any likes, dislikes in personal life, and just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Mohini. I'm an undergraduate student here at UCO. I am an English education major. I actually just started my teacher education program. So that involves going into classrooms in high schools around the area and shadowing. That also involves doing interviews, and it's a lot of work, but it's also exciting too. And also this semester, as you know, I started the Hindu Student Association here at UCO, which was a dream of mine for a long time. And finally, I got it done with the help of ISA and some other organizations. Mostly what I'm interested in is humanities. I'd say I really like comparative religion. I also, as you know, I speak several languages. I love linguistics and language. Human language is just a fascinating thing. It really is. Yeah, I think that kind of sums up where I'm at right now.
Nice, awesome. What was the curiosity with picking English education as a major at university?
Hmm. So there's actually a bit of a story behind that, or more like two stories.
Okay.
So there is two experiences that kind of shaped that.
Hmm.
I'd say first would be in kindergarten. Actually, I had this really great teacher from Ghana, and I really looked up to her. And to this day, she's still like had a big impact on my life. So she had this really cool program where she built a school in her home country, in a rural area where they don't really have schools, then English school, so that these kids could go work in city and urban environment.
Sure.
Because there will be a lot of local languages, but English will be like a medium for business. And she started when I was little, when I was in her class, and now growing up, you see the pictures of them on social media. They're growing up and they're graduating same time that I'm graduating. It's like kind of crazy to think about. And also in high school, I had this really sweet friend. Her name was V. So my high school experience was kind of small. It was still here in the city, but it was an alternative school. There was not many students there. They mostly like had a lot of like at risk or uh, students that had other issues, like
Like disabilities.
not like disability, like more like behavioral issues.
Okay.
Or things like that.
Understood.
Actually, I I had some problems with attendance, like truancy in high school, or middle school, I should say actually. In high school, then when I started getting older, I actually started doing really well in school, like my last few years in high school. But before that, I didn't really like school. But now I've like grown to really love education just in general. But yeah, there was this one classmate of mine, and we had some resources for second language English speakers at that high school, but only for Spanish speaking students. So, and she's a Vietnamese, so she didn't really benefit from that. And there was no way for her to really fully understand the content or anything. I just happened to know a little bit of Vietnamese and just happened to really be interested, like in the culture, in the language, and everything. And we became fast friends, and I would do my best to explain whatever the teacher was saying, just as a friend. Um, but I did learn a lot from that. It did really fulfill me. Like, I think what really makes me happy is explaining somebody and seeing them get it, seeing them learn. It's a very good feeling. Um, and also, I love learning too. So I think it goes hand in hand, teaching and
Sure.
learning, because even as a teacher, you will not know everything. There is some things that even your students will know better than you, and there's so many things we can learn from them too. But yeah, it was a really nice situation because I was getting to practice my Vietnamese, and in case I ever want to like travel there or get a job there, then I will have an experience there, and I can still like hold some basic conversation. And she was improving her English at the same time,
Right.
so it was a really nice exchange, a really nice partnership. And that's when I decided I wanted to be an English teacher. I think teaching was on the table for a long time,
Sure.
but I think that's when I really cemented that. And since then, since high school, I haven't really questioned it. I've always felt like confident that that's what I want to do. And as I might have told you, I'm looking to do the TESOL program here at UCO. It's the Teaching English as a Second Language for those who don't know. And I want to actually take that teaching skill overseas.
Sure.
I'd be mostly interested in Southeast Asia. I've looked at some study abroad programs and things like that that we have here at UCO. Like I know we have a partner university in Vietnam, and we also used to have a program in Malaysia, and like either of those would be a really cool
experience.
Yeah, I just I don't know if you know this, but Southeast Asia is my favorite region of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of like long term, where you'd love to go, is Vietnam like on the top of that list? Or what countries would you say are on like,
Yeah.
if you had to pick three, for example, which three would you want to go to?
Yeah, that's hard. I would say, well, India's up there, of course.
Right.
Thailand, probably. And then I would say either Vietnam or Malaysia. It's hard to commit to one. Yeah.
So you see yourself like probably doing that one day.
Yeah.
Going there. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Because yeah, and the thing that you mentioned about learning and seeing it in someone's eyes when they get it. You know, that's yeah, I can see what you mean in terms of how rewarding it is. Because there's this old adage of how when you are teaching other people, you are learning yourself as well, because you're able to cement that knowledge that you have. Is like an adage that I've heard a lot. So like looking at people in front of you, learning what you're telling them and understanding, yeah, I can imagine that being a good feeling. What about that gives you that good feeling? Like, is it the fact that someone learns, or is it the fact that you are learning along with them? Or is it just a combination of everything that
I think,
makes it
it's like a symbiotic relationship.
Sure.
Like they would say in biology or something. I feel like when I'm able to explain something, because I'm not always been good at explaining things to other people. That is a skill that you have to develop over time.
Right.
And so I feel that I want to be helpful to somebody. I want to be helpful to society in some way, and that's one way that I discovered that I am actually pretty good at this when I figured out how to do it. Also, I think teaching is a very extroverted profession,
Sure.
which is funny because I'm actually an introvert. But I do really enjoy interacting with people and learning their stories. I'm a very talkative person, even though I'm not always. I don't always want to be around people. I just
You have
to
your moments where you want to take some time and recharge, right?
Yeah, because I get my energy from being alone, but I also do really enjoy people, and I don't really have any issues with public speaking or anything like that. I think the introversion just comes from where I get my energy from.
Sure.
But it doesn't really define my personality.
Absolutely, I see.
So I think extroverted, an extroverted career would actually be better for me. Yeah.
I definitely see myself in that bracket too, because I need my alone time to be able to recharge and just reconfigure. But then, like you said, same for me in that. I like to have conversations. I like to be around people, but I also like to have my solitude. You mentioned about like starting the Hindu Student Association on campus. Before we get into that a little further, talk to me about your introduction to Hinduism and the culture and the religion and how you were sort of attracted towards it.
Yeah, I actually get asked this quite a bit. I think if I wanted to draw a rough timeline, I'd say about 5 years.
Okay.
That I've been really fully practicing. At first, when I was a teenager, I was very confused. I didn't know which religion I should belong to. At that time, being in the US, we thought, you're either Christian or not Christian. There's not really resources to learn about anything outside of a Western religious view.
Like that binary view of you're either this or you're not.
Yeah. Not that my parents ever locked me into that. They actually never really expected me to follow any specific religion, which I feel very lucky that I had some freedom to explore there. For some time, I was exploring just Christianity, like Protestant Christianity, like we have here in the US, which made sense because I've had enough exposure to that to understand it, to get it. But there was some things about it that didn't quite make sense to me. One thing that really doesn't compute in my mind is the idea of hell. I just couldn't see like a loving God creating a hell.
It's okay. No worries. You can just silent it. We can get back to it. Yeah.
So sorry.
No, it's okay.
Just cut that out.
No. It's natural. It happens. It's okay. Go ahead. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is one of the main things. Also, the LGBT issues and things like that. Because even at that time, I was very confused about my sexuality and my gender identity and things like that. Even though I didn't have the vocabulary to express that,
sure,
it was always there. So I think that's why I gave up Christianity specifically. Not that I'm totally done with a religion,
right?
But
you just didn't see yourself practicing it.
I just don't see myself locking myself into like a Western. I think more than just Christianity, Western religion in general, Western philosophy, I find it to be very rigid.
Okay.
And I don't see a whole lot of space there for things like esotericism, unique ways of looking at the world. It's a very left brain approach.
Can you explain that term that you just used? Was it esotericism? Is that what you said? Could you elaborate on that? I don't mean to cut you off,
Oh,
but if
no
you could
problem
elaborate.
at all. Yeah, that's the aspects of religion that aren't really accessible to everyone. It's like the specialized knowledge that's kind of like not that it's forbidden. In some traditions, maybe it would be forbidden. Like I think in Judaism, they have Kabbalah, which is like very forbidden for anyone outside of like Jewish priesthood to really study. That's an overgeneralization, but
Sure.
just to give you an example. But things like Tantra in Hinduism, what we have a lot of very specialized knowledge. Like not everybody will study the Vedas. I've studied as much as I can, but there's still a lot I don't know. There's a huge just body of information out there that most people will not come across. Like in Western religions, usually you have one book, and it's kind of bound to that.
Right.
Maybe you have some supplementary materials as well, but mainly it's that one book. And when I say Western religion, I should probably clarify that I'm specifically talking about Abrahamic religions.
Okay.
So Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And when I talk about these, I'm talking about huge groups of people. So I don't want to generalize.
You're not generalizing, or yeah. Okay,
yeah.
understood.
Yeah. But I think in Eastern religion, there's so many ways to explore that. There's so many dimensions of spirituality. Like the term yoga, it's kind of misunderstood here in the West. People think yoga is only about stretching, about postures, but
and
yoga,
about Lululemon pants. I'm just kidding, because that's a huge stereotype. But anyway, sorry.
No, you're okay. Yeah, I think yoga is like more about spiritual growth. It is it's a philosophy more than a tangible thing.
Right. It's not just an exercise or a practice, but then there's more to it that people are not aware of. Right.
Yeah, just to give an example that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to. Yeah. So when I was in that age, in my early teenage years, I was trying to find some kind of higher meaning, because I know I'm a theist at this point. I know I believe in some kind of power.
Right.
I just don't really know how to define it.
Sure.
So when I started getting into high school, when I was about 16, 17, that's when I came out to my mom. And at that time, it was got connected because I got that freedom to explore myself, not in just sexuality and gender, but also in what I believe.
Right.
To expand outside of the culture that I'm surrounded by. I think the thing that really switched is that I got very interested in Buddhism, specifically, like Theravada Buddhism. But at that time, I wasn't committing to any kind of belief system, because Buddhism, it can be a very secular, like, philosophy way of looking at things. Like, you don't necessarily have to believe in any kind of higher power or anything like that to follow that. It really is a great tool, like vipassana meditation, things like this. They're very great for developing yourself, improving yourself.
Right.
And I think that's something that really attracted me at the time, because I've always had a lot of mental health struggles, which is not always easy to talk about.
Sure.
And I won't get into the specifics of that, but I think that was my gateway into Eastern thought, Eastern religion.
So Theravada Buddhism is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if I should clarify on that.
Yeah, if you want to just elaborate on what Theravada Buddhism is and
Yeah.
how is that different from like
Yeah.
Buddhism that we know or people think what Buddhism is, if you
Yeah.
want to just elaborate on that.
Yeah. So to kind of generalize and to sum it up, there are two major sects of Buddhism, that'd be Mahayana and Theravada. So Theravada is the more, I would say, in general, is more faithful to what the Buddha himself actually taught during his life. The Theravada chants, it's preserved in Pali language, which is the language that Buddha himself spoke. So, like, these scriptures were spoken by him or by someone just transcribing or repeating what he's saying. So it's a bit closer to the actual original Buddhism, and you'll see that prevailing in places like Thailand, uh, India, Burma, Cambodia, places like that. So Mahayana, that's going to be like Tibet, China, Japan, Korea, places that we think more of like stereotypically like Asian,
Sure.
like East Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a more flexible form of Buddhism that kind of has merged into local traditions. Like in China, for example, we talk about the three main religions, which maybe we should be calling them philosophies. It's hard to tell, but like Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism.
Right.
And those three kind of interacted in interesting ways and were not always mutually exclusive. So just one example, I think Buddhism is just a very flexible religion in general. It's able to adapt to different cultural perspectives or cultural situations. Like, it can kind of take on different like forms of culture because it's not necessarily declaring any kind of god or declaring any kind of specific tenets for like lay people. Like, we do have like a fivefold path, 5 precepts that lay Buddhists have to follow if they commit to it.
Right.
But for the most part, like, they believe in a lot of the same cultural values as Hinduism, actually, because it's has a common origin in India. And so I was following in that tradition for a long time, and still I still go to those temples, like Buddhist temples, a lot. And at that time, I got interested in what else is out there. So I looked into Hinduism. And before you really understand anything about the philosophy or any of the deeper meanings of text or symbols, what you will come across first is gods. That's how Hinduism has been really historically categorized. I think people see it when they look at Hinduism. The first thing they notice, there's so many gods.
Right. Right.
It's a debate whether or not that makes it a polytheistic religion. I'd say it's more henotheistic, where you have like a particular one source, one like true divine being, and then you have some other like deities coming up out of that. But there are different perspectives on that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think researching like different gods and what are their meanings, I learned a lot about Shiva particularly, because Shiva stood out to me a lot. He's very different in not in just appearance, but like that's the first thing you'll see. You'll notice he's not wearing any jewels. He's not wearing any nice silk clothes, anything like this. He's wearing tiger skin. His body is smeared in ash. He looks like a hermit. Like he does not look like a very wealthy, or like a lot of gods you see them, they're have like gold jewels, they're dressed very nicely. But Shiva is like the opposite of this. He's not worried about the appearance. Something about that really spoke to me. And also the philosophy, like Shaiva philosophy, that is the philosophy of Shiva. It is a lot more flexible, accepting of different types of people. Um, and not to overgeneralize, but you have your main two divisions of Hinduism: Vaishnava, that's Vishnu,
Vishnu.
and Shaiva, that's following Shiva.
Right.
And sometimes Vaishnava, especially like Gaudiya Vaishnava, can be a little bit rigid, a little bit strict on certain things. But I feel like Shiva is very open to any kind of person. You don't have to be of a certain birth, of a certain race or national origin or anything like that to worship Shiva. Same with Sai Baba. For those who know about Sai Baba, because for me, the two of them, Shiva and Sai Baba, have been very mixed for me. Like they're very much part of the same thing, even though they're separate
Like
beings.
you view them as like a singular entity in some
Uh,
sense, or
I just consider them the same because I think when I see Sai's face, I see Shiva's face. Because Sai is so special to me, then I think Shiva is so special to me.
okay.
Then I think it is the same thing that is attracting me to both, if that makes sense. Not that they're literally the same being,
Sure.
but for me, like just how I feel connected to both of them in a very similar way.
Sure.
Yeah, I think following Shaiva philosophy, that is really what shaped my beliefs of today, that I'm still following in 5 years later. Uh, and I don't really feel limited to one religion. I still participate. I go to Buddhist temple. I'm actually ordinated in a local Mahayana temple, a Vietnamese temple. It's called Vinyak. I don't know if you would ever have heard of it. It's kind of a very big, famous temple here in Oklahoma. There's also a Gurdwara here in Oklahoma. So usually on Sundays I will be there as well. And I also am very actively involved in Sikhi as well. Sikhism. Yeah. So I think Eastern religions are very compatible like that. You see a lot of these people, like from Gurdwara, from Hindu temples, from Buddhist temple, they will be visiting each other's spaces a lot, and there is no tension there. It is just accepted, normal. And I do go to Christian church sometimes, and I've even been to a couple of mosques as well, because I'm very interested to get everyone's perspective on God, on spirituality. And I actively participate. It's not just a curiosity. Like fasting on Ramadan, I've done that past 3 years, I think. because I feel like I want to try to connect to God and spirituality, not in just one way, but in many ways. I don't think any one culture or one religion has a monopoly on the truth. I feel like God is one, and there's just different interpretations, different lenses of looking at that through your own culture and experiences, which is totally fine, and there's nothing wrong in that. It's just understanding that it's not a difference of what we're looking at. It's just a difference of how we're interpreting it. That's how I would explain it.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there because you hit on a lot of things, which is good. Here in what was the word you used to describe how, like, there's one god and multiple deities?
Oh, henotheism.
Henotheism. Okay, could you elaborate on that versus the opposing philosophy? I'm just a little curious about.
Yeah, no problem.
If you could elaborate on that a little further.
So polytheism would be many gods, many divine beings, which I think there are some religions that are truly polytheistic. I don't know if many of them are still around today. I would have to look into that more. I'd be interested to see. But with polytheism, it's not deities, it's gods, different divine powers are at play, not just one. In Henotheism, there is one divine source. In Hinduism, we call Parabrahman. That is the source of all other deities. So all these other deities that you see, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, etc., they are all just manifestations of one source. So it is hard to categorize it as truly polytheistic. Like if you go to a social studies class, they will say, oh, Hinduism is polytheistic, but it's more complicated than that. And that's why I like the term henotheism, because I think it more accurately describes Hinduism.
Okay.
Because most people that you talk to within Sanatan Dharma, that is what we call Hinduism, most of the philosophies that you see, they accept like Parabrahman as ultimate before any other deities. I'm not saying that there is not any polytheistic Hindu. There very well could be, but I haven't really talked to anybody with that view, and that's not the view I have. So
yeah, and you're just sharing your opinion. You're not necessarily saying that it is that or it is this.
Yeah, just from like the classic like Indian philosophy, like Dvaita, Advaita.
For those of them who don't know, if you want to just elaborate on very briefly.
So Dvaita means dual. So that means, like, I think in Western philosophy we also have this concept duality, non-duality. So Advaita dual, meaning that there is two, creator and creation, or some people would say like body, soul, or different. That is a duality there too. And then Advaita means singular. So there's no distinction there. It's all part of one.
The body and the soul are all just one. They're not two separate entities.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Advaita philosophy, we're also one with God as well. We're not separate from God.
Right.
As in Western philosophy, where God is kind of unreachable outside of us, but still in direct influence of us. Advaita would say we are like the universe is God itself.
Mm.
We are just manifestations of that divine energy, even if we're not conscious of it.
Mm.
And that's kind of what I feel like.
Mm.
I feel like we are divine beings, but we just don't we don't always acknowledge it, and it's hard to recognize. But that's part of spiritual awareness, knowing that I'm not different from you.
Right.
I'm not different from this chair or this table. It's all part of one collective. Even if it is not a conscious being, it is still in the same category
Right.
of existence.
Mm. Yeah. In terms of that, there's many thoughts. I'm trying to like condense it to something that I can interpret into a question.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'll unpack this in a second. I want to go back to something else that you said that I kind of resonate with
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how the different religions or the different philosophies that exist in this world are more so different perspectives. It's different perspectives through which we see one God.
Mm-hmm.
What, like, was there things that you researched or read or understood that led you to that perspective? Or what was it that led you to that perspective? Is probably a better way of putting it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I would say some of it is research,
Mm.
just because the way my mind works is that I'm a very big picture thinker.
Okay.
I'm very good at synthesizing a lot of ideas together. So naturally, when I study all of these religions, all of these philosophies, I feel like they're more similar than different.
Mm.
Even East, like I've been making this distinction between East and West, but actually, they're a lot more similar than we might realize.
Mm.
But I think the thing that really got me there is just personal experience. I think spirituality is a very personal thing,
Mm.
and you can't always arrive there from just reading books. You have to really experience it.
Mm.
And there is a certain overwhelming feeling that I get when I go into a temple, when I go into a church, into Gurdwara, anywhere. I still get that same feeling, that very peaceful feeling. And some of that is due to like a good community, some of that is due to just having a nice, comfortable space, and you feel like there is some kind of presence there, even if you cannot explain it.
Mm.
So that's why I got there, because why is it that I'm able to achieve this feeling
Regardless of
in
where you
any
go.
religious context,
Right.
not only
Not
limited
only
to
in a
one.
temple or not only in a
Yeah,
gurudwara or not only like in a
yeah,
mosque, but you're getting it everywhere.
yeah.
Yeah, like that positive energy that you experience when you walk into certain
Mm.
places. I definitely know what you're talking about. From the sense of the positive energy that you experience when you go to temples or mosques. I mean, I've not been to a mosque, not that I can remember. I've been
Yeah.
to a church once over here locally.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely see what you mean in terms of the positive energy that you feel when you go to a temple, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it can move you sometimes, because when I went back home during the summer, I remember walking into a temple. For those of you who are from Mangalore or know Mangalore, it's a temple called a Katil Durga Parmeshwari is a deity there.
Mm.
So yeah, going in there, I remember like tearing up as I walked in. I was just looking at the deity, and yeah, for some reason. So I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But sorry, that was a bit of a
No,
tangent. But getting back
Yeah.
to what you were talking about, um, I also see it that way, partly because I think, for me at least, it helps me rationalize the fact that, or at least make me believe that we're all one and that we're not that much different from each other. Other than, like, I guess a simpler way of putting it is this: we all start at the same point and we all end at the same point. But the way we get to that end point is very different because of our perspectives, our experiences, and all of that. So that sort of also contributes to why I see it like you do. But I'm curious to know, just from your opinion and from scenarios around you, why do we struggle to see it that way? Because I think we tend to draw very rigid lines of, okay, you know, we're completely different. This is, we are this because of XYZ. You are that because of ABC. So what is it that, I guess, for the lack of a better phrase, that we struggle with to sort of see those as overlapping a lot more than we think?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I don't know if I can answer it completely, but
To the best of your ability.
yeah, yeah, I think one of the main factors is culture. Just people look different,
Right.
people act different, based on where they're coming from, what is their background, and even though most people are able to move past that, there is still like some unconscious bias there. There is still something going on there where we cannot necessarily always put ourselves in someone else's shoes.
Right.
It can be very hard to look at somebody else's experience if you have not had any similar experience to that. So I think that contributes to it. And also, I think another thing that contributes to it is that when you look in scriptures, especially in Abrahamic religion, where these scriptures are saying this is the only correct way, anything outside of that is incorrect.
Right.
So it's assigning a judgment value to having a different opinion.
Right.
And that can be very difficult for people to move out of. I was there before when I was young.
Sure.
I'm still relatively young, but like younger, I guess. Yeah. Um, I think that is the two things that I could just identify off the top of my head that would contribute to that.
Yeah, because I mean, maybe this is a very naive perspective, but do you think that people would be happier if they saw that commonality between all these religions, or is that something that is not possible? What do you think?
I don't know if it's necessarily like achievable, but I do think it would be very helpful. Like I know that in a certain sense, humans will always find something different to divide them.
Right.
We're very tribal species.
Sure.
That is what evolution has done to humanity.
Yeah.
How do
Very
you
tribalistic in
survive?
our nature, right?
Yeah, you have to stick with a small group of people and fear anything outside of that. And so that I feel like that is still influencing how we think today. So I feel like you could still find something to divide people on,
Right.
even if we have a common religion or
Skin
not.
color,
Yeah,
gender,
yeah,
X, Y, and Z. There's plenty of ways. Yeah.
yeah. So it would be nice, and I would love to see that if all religions could get along, it would stop a lot of conflict in the world. You know, I know this is kind of touchy for a lot of people, but you look at Israel, Palestine, and a lot of that is ethnic, but a lot of it is religious too.
Right.
and that's really sad to see, um, because so many people are dying over religion, and I just hate that as a religious person. That breaks my heart,
Right.
Yeah. But I think we're moving closer to, like, we're in a global society.
Right.
Technology and social media and the internet, these things have connected all of us. So people are getting new perspectives that they would never have gotten otherwise.
Right.
So I think in some way we are moving closer to that. I don't know if we'll ever actually achieve that, but I don't want to be pessimistic about it either.
Yeah. I guess it's just that, like, the other side, I guess, makes me wonder that there needs to be some difference in that, or maybe the way people see. Well, let me just ask it this way, because I think I'm trying to um, figure out how we get to those differences. Like, instead of seeing the commonality, like, or instead of like appreciating the commonality more, we tend to give more credence to the differences that exist. For right, I mean, it is right in some cases. It's probably not right in other cases, right? Like, I think looking at or emphasizing too much on the differences probably reduces our ability to accept people. Would you say so?
Yeah, I can see that perspective as well.
Right. Whereas, like, being like a little more, or looking at it from a perspective of, okay, these things are common, we share that commonality, we should be able to accept each other a little more. So I don't know, it's just a thought that I have. But before I start rambling, let me ask you this other thought that I have about this other thought that I have. There's this very interesting thing that I heard on a podcast a few years back about how what people generally practice is not purely religion. It's more likely an interpretation of the religion that they're practicing. And let me just elaborate on that a little further, in the sense that, say, for example, you're reading a religious text, right? And due to your personal experiences and the way you've been brought up, you interpret those things a certain way. And that, the combination of what you read in the book and your personal experiences, create something that's quite unique, which is the interpretation of that religion in your mind. In saying all of that, do you think that our interpretation, well, let me ask you, do you think that that is true? Like, is that a perspective that you've thought about, or is that something that you can see being true? Is that we're living an interpretation of religion versus purely living the religion?
I've never put it through that frame, but I have thought about, how differently we can all look at the same thing.
Right.
So I do think that makes a lot of sense. That's how you can get so many different sects or so many different groups based on a single text. Right. Everybody has a little bit of different way, and I think a lot of it is based on culture. And also, most people will inherit their parents' beliefs. It is just a natural process.
Right.
So we tend to reflect whatever we were raised with. So if we are given a very harsh, strict code of ethics that is not very flexible or accepting of others, then there's a good chance that we will carry that with us.
Right.
But it's not a rule. You can definitely break that.
My follow-up question to that was going to be, like, is that what contributes to a lot of the conflicts that we see between two religions or within the same religion? Like, our interpretations of what we read, does that, in your opinion, contribute to a lot of the conflict that we see?
Yeah, I would say so. And also, when it comes to a matter as touchy as God,
Right.
like if you're saying we're arguing about the reality of the universe, about existence, this is a very heavy thing. And when you tell somebody that they're wrong about that, it can be taken very negatively.
Right. Because it can
It's
be quite offensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had some debates with different types of Christians, with some Muslims. I think Western religion, like, has a little bit more of that, where it seems to be promoted that this religion is the only correct one.
This is the truth.
Yeah, not that that isn't true in other religions, but it seems more so in
it's more
those.
Prominent.
Yeah. So yeah, I've had some very interesting debates. Sometimes I'm not really looking to debate somebody. Sometimes I just want to check out at the store or go about my day, but somebody wants to engage in that kind of conversation with you. Because here in the US, there's a lot of people like street preachers or people that are very outward about trying to spread the religion, trying to change somebody's religion. And so I have been kind of forced into some of those conversations that aren't comfortable for me, but still valuable in some way, and trying to understand where this person is coming from. And a lot of times they've had similar experiences in their life that I've had. They had some kind of inciting incident that made them feel this way. Like, I talked to a guy once on the street. He kept me there for a good 15 minutes. I was not happy in the situation, but I have a very hard time saying no to people. But he was telling me about how following Jesus, following God in the Bible, how that got him out of addiction. It was like a rehabilitation type thing, or it was like a religious, a church, but also they had a rehabilitation program. So he had a positive experience from that. And to say that no, you're wrong, is to say that no, that you don't feel that way. That's not, your experience is not true, which I would never say that to somebody. Like, I definitely think his experience is valuable, but it's through a certain framework. The way that he's interpreting it is not something that I fully agree with, but I'm open to it at the same time.
Yeah, I think the very interesting thing that I think we sometimes forget, and I sometimes forget too, is that two things can be true at the same time, right? Like, you might have benefited from being introduced to, like in this case, the anecdote that you mentioned, in this person's experience of being introduced to Christianity and how that helped them get out of addiction. But at the same time, someone else is probably not happy practicing it for any amount of reasons. And that is okay, right? Like, I think we sometimes tend to forget that. Is that something that you've thought about, or maybe why do we forget about those things? Definitely. That duality exists between things possibly being true for you, but not necessarily the same for me.
Yeah, definitely. I've thought about that a lot. I feel like we are also different people.
Right.
So what will work for you will not necessarily work for me. Our religion is just a framework to interpret reality. The way I would explain it, and feel free to agree or disagree, but God created humans. God did not create religion. Humans created religion to try to understand, just like any other way that we've tried to that we've created to try to understand the world around us. Mathematics, science, philosophy, things that we use to describe the natural phenomena around us, but it's still a framework and it still has its own limitations. I did I had a conversation a few months back with one of my cousin, her husband. I was visiting them, and he's very strong atheist, which I think atheist is a very valid viewpoint, and I would never judge somebody for being atheist. But the way he was talking about religion was in a very degrading way, and he was like trying to say, "Oh, I just see how it is. I just see it through science. I don't have any bias." And I was trying to explain to him the scientific method that you're using to interpret the world is created by humans. It still has bias. We cannot escape bias no matter how hard we try. Uh, he was not happy with that response, but I think that shows that like things tend to be considered objective. We don't think about how did this come about? How did I come to this conclusion?
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that you said that atheism, like it's a valid way to look at things. I'm curious to know, could you elaborate on why you feel that way?
Hmm. Because atheists are just interpreting the world that they see around them.
Right.
If they don't feel like connected with any kind of God or spirituality, who am I to try to convince them, to force them into that? Because I don't really believe in any kind of hell or anything of that nature.
Right.
I feel like everyone is capable of liberation. It just takes conscious effort. It is more about our attachments than our like. You can believe in God and still be neglecting every other area of your life. You can be a very evil person. I know good and evil is not a good dichotomy to make, but like you can be doing a lot of evil things in the world and still be very religious and pray every day. But then what is the point in that? Should you get a reward for that? I don't think you should go to hell or get punished for it. I think you should have to just deal with the consequences now. Um, so I think atheists are looking at it, because my mom is not religious. My dad is, so I got a kind of a mix. Um, they're looking at it through a lens of what is observable. So if it is not observable for me, then why should I believe it? Why should I make a commitment to that? And I think that's totally fair. And also, atheists can also see things in religion that maybe we don't see because we're caught up in it. Uh, and then we can see things that they don't see. An outsider perspective is a great thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh, like I've met some very nice, lovely atheists, and it's just like religious people. There are some very great, friendly people, and then there are some that are very stuck so hard in their belief that they feel like anyone outside of it is not valid. So I think it goes hand in hand in that way. Because even if you don't believe in God, you still have a viewpoint, you still have experience, you're still interpreting the world through some kind of frame.
Right.
So I think that's the commonality there.
Mm.
Um, I didn't always believe in God, and now that I do, I feel like my life has improved. But also, that doesn't mean that somebody like there may be somebody who left religion and their life improved. That's what happened with my mom, because she grew up with a kind of religion that is very strict. That's not why she left. She just the real reason why she left is because she just didn't feel it. You cannot force a belief. It has to come organically.
Internally.
Yeah. She really tried. Like, I remember she told me, I really tried to believe in God, and it just couldn't make sense in my head.
Mm.
And so I don't think God is vindictive. I don't think God is going to punish you for not believing. I think God is more concerned with, are you doing the right deeds? Are you doing service to others around you? Are you taking care of yourself even? So I think that is more important than belief itself.
Mm. Yeah, because I think sometimes, like, if like you speak to a religious person, they're quite dismissive of atheists, and similarly, atheists are quite dismissive of
Yeah.
religious people. So, like, I like the way you contextualized both of it using your personal experience and familial experience. Because, yeah, again, going back to, I guess, what I said earlier, like, two things can be true at the same time, right? I think we lose sight of that as human beings sometimes, but it's very important to recognize that, and how it's okay, like, if someone doesn't believe what you believe in. Because I guess the other thing that we also forget, because I guess as human beings in society, we have this habit of generalizing a lot. So usually it becomes easier to say that, okay, people of religion X do this, people of religion Y do that, people of religion Z do that. That is why they're bad, that's why they're good, X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. But at the end of the day, like, if you look at it a little more microscopically, people are different, right? Within that religion too, some people are more accepting, other people are less accepting. The reasons for that vary, but I think we sometimes lose sight of that as human beings as well. We might have touched on this already, but why do you think that is? Like, why do we lose sight of that?
It is very easy to see something outside of you as scary. Something I don't understand is scary. And also, we can see, like, humans are great at forming patterns. We're a little bit too good at it, because we take these patterns and extrapolate it to a lot more people. One thing that I've noticed a lot lately, I've been seeing a lot of tension between Hindus and Muslims. Like, that's always existed, but I think now with social media, like, I see it a lot more. I don't know if that means it's actually going up or it's just being shown
amplified more through social media.
Yeah. And even I've seen, like, some of my close friends saying certain things like, oh, well, Islam is just a bad religion, it causes violence, things like this. I don't think it's the religion that's causing that. And also, I don't know, I don't want to quantify how many people are perpetuating that, but I don't think I think that's a minority of people that are doing that. You will have extremists no matter where you go. And it's very easy to point out these extremist views, or just any people that we don't like. It's very easy to find something to disagree with and then blow that up. And because there's been a lot of controversy, with, I think, that movie Kerala Story, if you've heard of it.
I have heard about it. I haven't watched it, but have
Yeah,
you watched
I've not seen it, but
it? But you've heard about the
yeah,
controversy associated with it.
yeah,
Okay.
I didn't feel like watching it because I felt like it is kind of a propaganda.
Okay.
Yeah, it is like talking about, and Zakir Naik, maybe
Yeah.
you do.
What was the name of the channel? He's the guy who had like a TV channel, right?
Yeah, and he was like a TV, like, he's kind of like how we have like televangelists.
Right. There we go. Yes.
He's like the Muslim version of that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it was based on a true story involving him. Um, and he's also a very controversial figure.
Right.
And the story, like, I've seen reviews of it, and I didn't feel like watching it because I just don't want to engage with that kind of material. But it seems like it's trying to push a narrative that, like, he's being like predatory, like trying to like take these Hindu girls and like force them to convert, trying to trick them, and then we feel like that is happening a lot more than it is because we're focusing it in the media. So I guess if I had to try to explain, I think that would be the main thing that comes to mind. But I don't know if that's how true that is. It just seems like, from my experience and just what I see and what I hear from people around me, that I hear a lot of negative to neutral things about Islam from my community, and very few positives. And I think that has to do with cultural differences as well. A lot of it is tied into politics, like India versus Pakistan, things like this also affected a lot. I know there's probably a lot more examples in the world, but I'm just more familiar with India and Hinduism, so that's kind of how I relate it.
No, that's okay. That's completely fine. Just to add to that thought on Kerala Story, I haven't watched it, so I don't know it from first-hand experience. But I remember talking to some people back home about this when I had gone recently, and they were talking about how a lot of those things actually happen and that they're true. And I think that's the other thing also, right? Which is the unfortunate part. It's very unfortunate that those things are true and that they happen. So a part of me does feel like it is important to know those things also, but I think it becomes problematic when it becomes more propaganda. But then again, I think with things like that, not that it's not hard to propagandize it. I mean, it is very easy to propaganda, like turn that into propaganda. But I guess what I'm getting at is, then if that's the case, can we not make anything that is of similar topics? I'm just curious. I'm just exploring a thought with you.
I'm saying, for me, I personally don't want to engage with it, but
and I understand that completely.
I would never judge anyone else for.
Right.
I think the thing for me is that it is not. We're not focusing on the bad thing that is happening. We're focusing on the religion of the person who did this.
Okay.
I do watch a lot of content, I guess, not necessarily like documentaries or maybe just like on YouTube, about extreme religions, cults, people who are very horribly mistreated by their religion. And it's a very universal thing because people in power often seek power because they want to misuse it. And it's easy to say, try to make a causation from that correlation, try to say that it's the religion that's causing this bad thing. No, it's just people. Some people have certain tendencies. They will use their religion or whatever they can use to justify it. So I think that's the big takeaway from me in that conversation. And we've seen this also within Hinduism as well. Um, there is one documentary that I really enjoyed. Um, it is about Osho, Rajneeshis. It's on Netflix. It's called Wild Country. If you've seen it.
I don't think I have, no.
Yeah, but I think you're familiar with Osho. Yeah, or the
not a lot, but I've heard the word, I've heard the name and a little bit, but not enough to have an informed opinion about it.
See, yeah, it is a very, like, I will not go into it or spoil it too much.
You can. I really don't care.
Oh, okay.
Spoiler alert. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So basically, he was making a community in Oregon. It was mostly Americans that were following, which is what I see a lot of, like, predatory gurus or religious founders. They're preying like a lot on Americans who don't really have a clear conception of what Hinduism is or Eastern religion, and you'll have like a lot of like fake yogis and gurus. And yeah, there was some very bad stuff that went on in that community, and also he was kind of like trying to erase the local community.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, he was like trying to make his own country, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a very interesting story, very strange. And from the local community, like the Americans that were living in that area, they were very, like, there was a lot of racism and like prejudice against Hindus in India. So there is some like real problems going on there, but for the most part, it is like a valid concern. Like, you've kind of uprooted a whole community to build your ashram here. You did not get any approval there because he had to leave India. So he just built his ashram in the United States because most of his followers from US or just from Western countries. So it is an interesting thing where it's been kind of co-opted. The religion has been kind of reinterpreted to make it more appealing to Americans or Western culture. But yeah, that's just an example of a really interesting documentary about how religion can be misused. Or also Bikram Chaudhary.
The Bikram Yoga guy?
Yeah, Bikram Yoga.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah, a while back. But
yeah, the sexual assault stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was using his place as a religious leader to abuse.
Was he a religious leader? Or was he seen more as like just a yoga teacher?
Yoga.
Maybe
I
I'm
guess
forgetting.
Spiritual, I guess. Sometimes it bleeds over, but it was more like a spiritual, like meditation and yoga. I don't know if it was more about, like, he wasn't like preaching about God that much.
I think it was like the origin. I think that's where the origins of hot yoga and all those things go back. I think I can't remember specifically because I watched this documentary a while back, so I cannot remember.
Yeah, but he was the hot yoga guy.
Yeah.
I don't get that stuff. It's so crazy to me.
Right.
I would hate that.
Right. Yeah. But okay, so just to sort of, maybe you've answered this already, so please correct me if I'm wrong in saying this or asking this, but what is it that separates Osho documentary from Kerala story for you?
I think it's because the Osho documentary is looking at from an outside perspective. We're looking at what happened. We're interviewing people that were involved. There is still a judgment value there that this guy is bad, but we're talking about actual crimes that he did. We're not saying, look how bad Hindus are, look how bad India is. And the impression that I got, and maybe I probably should watch the movie, honestly, from the Kerala story, is that it's kind of pushing this narrative that Muslims are trying to take over India. I think we've kind of seen this. I wouldn't say it's like a widespread thing, but it's like still somewhat prominent in the
narrative,
society.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like here in US, you have some very similar narratives that immigrants are trying to destroy the country or something. So it's one of those things that I feel like it's not trying to be informative. It's just trying to push a certain narrative.
Interesting. I mean, I haven't watched either, so I don't really have a great opinion on which ones are doing a better job at what. But I see your point though, because I think especially when you're trying to be accepting of things, like when these things get like these kind of narratives get shoved down your throat, it is quite jarring to take it. So I can see where you're coming from in that sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't have much of an informed opinion on either.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting how we are in a world where nowadays it's sometimes hard to even trust documentaries. I feel because I mean, again, maybe this was true back in the day as well, but now it's just a little more prominent because of social media. But there's this growing feeling, be it with media or whatever, that at least in my head, there's this growing feeling. It was probably always like that. Those are just channels for narrative, right? They're just channels for people to push certain narratives. So I guess that's where things also get very dangerous because it's human motivations taking over like the media that they produce. They sort of dramatize certain things, create certain negative narratives about certain things and all of that. But I guess that's just the world we live in. Not saying that that's the right thing, but that's just the world we live in. So
I think that ties into what I was talking about earlier with everything being filtered through a worldview.
Right.
There is no way to have completely unbiased anything. We can just try to, like, obviously when I watch these documentaries or if I consume any media or read any book, I'm not going to just take everything at face value. And I think that's a lot of what my religious view is about. Like when I read a scripture, I'm not going to just look at what it literally says. I'm going to try to think about the cultural context, trying to think about what was the intention behind it, not what is literally there. And that's not always easy to do.
Sure.
But it's a very healthy thing, I think.
Why do we struggle to do that as human beings? Why do we struggle to zoom out and look at things from a different perspective?
That's another
That's a
hard
very loaded question. Yeah.
Yeah.
But your opinions?
Yeah. The human brain is very flexible, but we're also creatures of habit. We like what is familiar. We like routine. And once something gets comfortable, once something is routine for us, it's very hard to, it takes time to shift. I did not convert overnight. It was a process.
It took you a while.
Yeah, it was a very natural process, I would say. Like it just kind of happened, but it was not a conscious thing. Um, I don't think anyone goes into life thinking, oh, I'm going to convert my religion, I'm going to change my views, I'm going to change as a person. It just kind of happens to us. But it takes a long time, and that can be difficult to force. It is I feel like it is human nature to resist that change. You see that with every generation.
Right.
The younger generation is doing something different. The older generation doesn't like it.
Right.
So it's very hard to look at a new perspective and try to see it without the present framework that you have.
Right. And I wonder if part of it goes back to what we talked about earlier about the tribalistic nature of human beings and how like there is a level of comfort or there's a level of safety with being in those sort of spaces, I guess, like be it mentally or physically, the sense of being in the community and so on.
Yeah.
So going away from it, like you said earlier, you used the phrase that it's scary for people. So those things probably have a role to play, but I think we sometimes forget that life generally for human beings has gotten easier. Now, again, granted, I'm not diminishing the struggles that people have today or the struggles people are having in other parts of the world today either. But generally, if you sort of compare where we were as a species to where we are now, like things have become a little easier, right? So I think, and this is again just a personal opinion, but I think while we as a species have evolved and like our environment has evolved in terms of the things that we have and the ease of getting things, the ease of getting food, the ease of getting around, the ease of communicating, X, Y, and Z, we sometimes still forget that our approach to being humans also has to change over time. I don't know if I'm making sense a lot.
I get it.
But yeah, it's kind of like everything around us has evolved, but our brain hasn't evolved enough. Yeah, again, I'm no psychologist, neither am I a neuroscientist, so I don't know any of this off of pure knowledge or research, but it's just maybe something that I do need to maybe research a little more. But
it makes me think of the phrase paper tiger, if you've heard of this.
No, elaborate on that.
So paper tiger refers to a situation where we have a stress response as if there is a real danger. That's like our anxiety response. Our blood pressure goes up, we get excited, but there's no real danger. It's like there is a deadline in the office, in school, or something like that. There is some kind of drama with family, with friends. It is not a real danger to us, but we responded as if it is like a tiger that is coming to attack us. If we put ourselves in the shoes of like Paleolithic humans, they're in the forest, they see something move, they have to respond like this. They have to respond immediately, or they could get eaten.
Right.
But even though we still have that response in us, it's not really needed. So it's a tiger on paper. It's not a real tiger. So that is the meaning of the phrase.
Got it. No, I've not heard of that, but no, that's a very good way. Like that's a very good way to explain that for sure. That's a very good. Is that a metaphor?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very good metaphor to explain that completely.
Yeah.
I was forgetting English for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, what do you think could help us consciously to be able to zoom out a little more? Now, again, before you dive into that, I do also want to mention that sometimes life just gets in the way for people. Life is hard, like everybody has their own struggles, everyday struggles, and so on. So you don't really these are not things that you necessarily feel the need to care about as much. Because at the end of the day, all you care about is making sure, generally what humans care about is making sure you have food on the table, you have a roof to live under, you have some money that you've earned to be able to spend it to get those things. And that's pretty much what we're seeking, right, as human beings. So that's just a sort of opposing thought that I have about my own feeling of why, like, we don't open ourselves up to these other sides. But yeah, what do you think we would have to do generally to be able to zoom out a little more?
Interesting question.
Or what's helped you zoom out, if that's easier to answer?
I would say I've actually had a lot of trouble in that, because I can be self-aware. I'm having all this anxiety. Why I'm feeling this way? Nothing actually is wrong, even though I know that the problem is solvable, even though I know that this is not the end of the world. Still, in my brain or in my body, it still feels that way. Um, one thing, talking to people, that has helped me a lot. Um, I think even I've talked to you about some of my personal struggles.
Yes.
Even if that person can't give you advice or doesn't know anything about the situation, it is just nice to have somebody to listen to you and say, I see that you're going through this. That really stinks. I'm sorry for that. I think that's a great thing. You don't necessarily need to solve the problem then and there. It's just validation that what you're going through really is affecting you. It's very real. And another thing, repositioning your actual body. So, like going for a walk, going for a drive, meditating, doing some kind of exercise. I think that puts you out of whatever headspace you're in so that you can think more clearly. Because when you're in sometimes the physical space can really affect you as well.
Right.
And that's been very true for me. The physical space that I'm in really affects how I think, what I'm feeling. So sometimes I like to just go away and come back at a later time when I'm not so worked up.
Right. The flip side of that, I think, also sort of helps us in terms, or not the flip side, but that side also helps us accept people. And would you say that it helps us accept people when we zoom out a little more and observe some of these other things that make you realize that, oh, we're actually much more similar than I thought we were? How much has that helped you accept other people around you? And I guess the second question would be, maybe this is a little more loaded, is do you feel accepted? But you can answer the first one and then we can go into the second one.
Yes. So the first one, like you said, how I feel like accepting to others, or how that's helped me accept others.
Yes. How has zooming out helped you accept others?
Yeah. I think my process of spirituality has been a lot of that zooming out of, as you said, looking at all the perspectives and trying to synthesize them together.
Right.
Before then, I was kind of like when I was younger, I was a bit skeptical about religion, and I know we've been focusing on religion a lot, but that just goes for anything. Like I'm skeptical of our new way of living, a new way of thinking. I've been pleasantly surprised when I get myself out there, because when I was a kid, my introversion was much stronger than it is now. I was very scared to go outside of my comfort zone. Now it's no problem for me, but back then it was definitely a struggle. Like Talking to new people was very hard. I was just afraid of everyone, and the solution to that was one, just getting older and realizing that other things, other people, they are not scary. They're not going to harm you, even though like I'm not literally thinking that. Some response in my body is saying that. Um, Also, that they're not going to judge you, and also exploring, just traveling around, seeing how other people, like going into other people's spaces, as long as they're comfortable with you being there,
Sure.
is a great thing. I think everyone should do that at some point. And school, a lot of different people from different backgrounds are coming together.
Right.
School, work, any kind of social interaction you have is a great thing, because you would not organically be around those people,
right,
but you are forced to work together with them, whether or not you
you see
like
eye to
it.
eye or not.
Yeah. So I think those are the things that contributed to me being so open-minded now. When everybody when they're a baby, when they're a young child, we're all born with some kind of bias. We prefer people that look like us, that talk like us, that think like us. And it is not necessarily bad, as long as we are able to look into the future, and as we become adults, we're able to have a self-awareness to analyze that. And I think for most people that naturally goes away. Some people get stuck in it, though.
Yeah. And to get into the second question of acceptance for you, like, do you feel accepted in the MMs that you're in? I know it's a bit of a weird transition, but
no, I think it's relevant. Yeah. I feel different types of acceptance from different groups.
You can elaborate on what you're comfortable.
Yeah.
If you're not comfortable, that's completely fine.
Yeah. So I'd say, I'm usually around Indians,
Right,
or just Asians in general. I would say with Indians, or just like South Asian, or like Eastern cultures, I do feel very validated in my religious views. I feel validated culturally. I feel like, I can wear the clothes that I like, the jewels that I like. I can present myself how I feel comfortable, and Indians are very accepting and receptive of that. A lot of my like jewelry and clothes and stuff was given to me. It was not bought by me. So it is like, I think when a lot of cultures, when they see you participating in their culture, they will kind of cheer you on. Some cultures are not like that. I know there is some situations where it's not really comfortable to go into their space for them, and I respect that. I think the other kind of validation that I don't always get from that community, I feel like a lot of Indians, or just Asians in general, don't really fully understand mental health issues, uh, which is really unfortunate. And sometimes I have issues with like LGBT, not from Indians. Most Indians are very cool about it, about like transgender. But and with Asian cultures, the judgment is very silent. It's very like behind your back.
it's not confrontational.
Yeah. So even if they are judging me, I'm not worried about it because I'm not hearing about it.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. But yeah, sometimes Americans can be very upfront about it, which I don't care for that. But
like the fact that you are practicing Hinduism and that you're transgender,
yeah,
or
all of it, just
all of it just
just
together?
anything. Yeah. Because in every culture there's people like that don't like people that are different from them. But
Right.
I feel like the culture in America is very outspoken. It's very individualistic, so it kind of empowers that behavior of like antagonizing people openly. Like I have a lot of experiences of that. But um it's, for the most part, it's been mostly manageable. I'd say if I want validation for like things like mental health, LGBT, things like that, there is a lot of LGBT communities here in the US, and I think there is a home for me there. I don't always feel like 100% included. Like I feel like some of those spaces can get into a think tank, I guess, like
an echo chamber.
an echo chamber. Yeah. Where it can be, the views can get very extreme. um and not always in a positive way.
Right.
So sometimes that makes me uncomfortable, but I do feel accepted and validated on the gender issue and like mental health stuff. Those spaces are very good for that specifically. So I can get my validation in different places. But I would say for most issues, I will rely on my Indian community. Um, I would say, barring the mental health thing, and obviously I don't get too much into like sexuality, but for the most part, my gender is respected. I don't really have to explain myself too much, especially with South Indians, because it's like I think just in general. Tell me if you agree, but South Indians are a little bit more laid back.
I guess we're less confrontational as
Less
people.
confrontational.
I think that's just my read of it.
Yeah.
North Indians can be perceived to be a little more confrontational, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say like with South Indians, like it's never really a problem of like I don't have to explain like, oh, please call me she. They just, a lot of them just get it immediately.
Right.
Um, and even a lot of the older folks don't really have a problem with it.
Any sort of closing thoughts on the feeling of acceptance? Because it feels nice to be accepted, right? Like I think that's what we all seek as human beings to some extent, is to be accepted by the people that we love, by the people that we're around. And it's not always possible to be accepted or to have your feelings validated. But I think the fact that you're finding that is good, and I'm happy for you for that. That's really good. So yeah, any closing thoughts on that, on like acceptance and validation? Because not to go on too much further, but in terms of validation, I can also see it being like a double-edged sword, because I've experienced that in my personal life, where seeking validation is not always the best thing to do, because there can never be an end to it sometimes. But I think that sense of acceptance that you get from people around you is definitely quite. I don't know if this is the right phrase to use, so please let me know if there's a better phrase to use here. But like it's sort of like the feeling of acceptance definitely enriches life. Would you say so?
I would definitely agree with that.
Right.
I think there is some areas where, I know some people are not going to accept me, and I just have to be okay with that.
Right.
I used to be a lot more insecure when I was younger about it, but now I'm kind of in a place where I can compartmentalize that a little bit. Okay, they're going to like call me he, they're going to call me sir. That's okay. I can't do anything about that. It's not my job to correct them. I know who I am, and so I
And
should
you're
not
secure
be,
about who you are.
yeah, I should not be too bothered by that.
Right.
But also, sometimes I want to be validated for the work that I do. I want to feel
Sure.
appreciated.
Sure.
Um, and usually I'm able to get that because I have a great job, I have a great family, great friends. I feel very lucky for that. And it's very, very valuable to me when somebody I love or somebody I care about recognizes like what I do, or recognizes who I am, like tries to really see me at my level. Um, I think everybody deserves that.
Right.
So I try to see people where they're at. I try to first be accepting before I ask for acceptance, even though sometimes that's hard to put into practice. But when we do that, we will naturally see it return to us, that same respect. So when I meet people that I don't really understand, or I have not experienced their experience before, I try to be as open as possible. Um, it can be hard when, in modern times, we have a lot of newer ideas coming, and things are going so fast with social media. So what we know this year will be different next year. So it can be hard for me to keep up with. I'm kind of an old soul in a lot of ways, unfortunately. So sometimes it's hard for me to adapt to the more modern ideas. uh, I tend to be very classical in a lot of ways in my thinking. Like, even though I'm very open-minded and combining a lot of different ideas together, I'm doing it in a way that is like rooted in a lot of like very old traditions.
Sure.
So I will try my best to accept others, but and hope that they accept me back. But it's not like I would not depend on it. I would not count on it.
Yeah, that's definitely a good takeaway for all of us, right, in everyday life, to realize that. And I think that's a good note to sort of cap this conversation off. Thank you so much for taking the
Thank
time
you
to
so
do
much. Yeah.
this.
It was great being on the Ranveer show.
Without Ranveer.
Yeah.
But
I just say that because it just reminds me.
Got it.
Yeah,
Got
yeah.
it. Wow, it's interesting that you mentioned that comparison, but because
Yeah.
I actually follow Ranveer. I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't kept up with every episode that comes out recently, but I generally follow
Yeah.
him a lot. So it's interesting you mentioned that comparison. But yeah, on that note, thank you so much once again, Mohini.
Thank
I
you.
really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for those of you listening and watching, stay tuned for the next episode. Adios.